some specialists, some experts in this field who are doing some very interesting work. And that's why I invited these guys. First keynote is from Chase DiMarco. He's a podcaster, author, content creator, and speaker. He's an advocate for affordable education, active learning education methods, and utilization of technology and competency-based systems in health education. He's a business development professional with an MBA in healthcare administration from Western Governors University and a PhD in educational psychology from Capella University, and an MD from St. James School of Medicine. He was also awarded Top 100 Visionaries in Education in 2020 from GFEL. Dr. DiMarco, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction and for allowing me the honor of speaking to all these great physicians and innovators today. And I want to share, let's do this. Sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing on me today for some reason. So here we go. Want to make sure that these slides
be a cat in the room.
Want to make sure the slides are visible.
Looks good.
All right, perfect. So my name is Chase DiMarco, and I'm the CEO of FindARotation. And what I want to discuss is something that wasn't really discussed very often before this past year. And the pandemic has really highlighted some of the obstacles and limitations within the current system of clinical education in particular. And we truly believe that the future of clinical education is going to come around through crowdsourcing information. So during the pandemic, there were initially a lot of shortages of clinical sites due to many different concerns. There were concerns of students catching COVID. There were concerns about PPE shortages. And this limited the sites to mostly telemed and a lot of students that didn't actually receive a lot of clinical education as opposed to their counterparts a year or two previously. On top of this, those that were able to practice clinically often didn't see a variety of patients. They were very limited to patients with COVID. So again, limiting the exposure that a lot of healthcare students, and in particular, physician students, MD and DO students, had during this period of time. And this isn't necessarily a new issue, but it's become exponentially worse due to the pandemic. On top of all of this, the two clinical skills assessments that we typically have for our board exams, the USMLE Step 2 CS and the COMLEX Level 2 CS, were also canceled. So just further down the road of limiting that one-on-one patient experience, that direct interaction with the patients to gain their clinical experience. So obviously, this is going to lead to a severe lack of clinical training in many instances. And the repercussions for this, especially for patient care, we haven't even scratched the surface of yet. We don't know all of the outcomes that might come from this. However, we believe that community-driven change is going to be the best way to fight this problem currently and in the future. We know that medical students need a lot more opportunities. They need variety too, not just necessarily what's available at their school. They might have interests in other specialties and other rotations that their school can't provide. Or if you're from a newer DO school or an IMG, FMG, as I am, then your resources are even more limited. And with those limitations, it's really difficult to make an informed decision about what specialty is going to be the best for you. So through community-driven change in the clinical education sphere, we can tap into a lot of other resources that weren't previously really utilized very well. And one of those big resources is going to be the community physicians, the non-academic physicians, which make up approximately 85% of the current physician workforce. And we know that through previous studies, certain studies have, in particular, have shown that medical students want to teach, up to 45% of them in some students. So there shouldn't be a lack of clinical teachers. There are just a lack of clinical sites, often due to just traditional ways of approaching this topic and sometimes some academic versus non-academic barriers. So some of the reasons that we believe these clinical options, increased clinical options, are really going to make a difference in the future of healthcare and in patient care is we all hear about the physician shortage, and it doesn't seem to be shrinking too much or going away anytime soon. And in fact, the most recent study showed that the AMA is predicting 133,000 physician deficit by 2033. And even though we had a record number of students that applied for the match this year in 2020, up to 1 in 5 physicians end up switching their specialty. They change residencies, change specialties. And this can be a huge burden on the healthcare system. Having to start over from scratch if you're a resident, or that extra education that is required to retrain in another specialty just hinders the ability of the physician to provide the best care, the most care they can, especially since they're going back and relearning different topics. There's a huge change in the clinical landscape as well. And one of the big ones happens to be from IMGs. Actually, IMGs currently make up about 25%, 1/4 of the US healthcare workforce, the physician workforce. And there is still, in some spheres, a negative stigma in medicine about students that study abroad or come from another country. And both of these can fall under the category of IMG or FMG, international medical student or graduate, foreign medical student or graduate. But in the most recent match, almost half of these IMGs were actually US citizens. So the stigma that's if they don't understand the US healthcare system or don't understand the US culture is really not that big of a concern. So we do propose that this is one area that can be or can see the greatest change from a more equitable system. And just some of the specialty stats, IMGs actually make up a majority of certain fields, certain specialties, including geriatric medicine and nephrology, but they also make up a significant portion of basically every other specialty. So ignoring these students, this aspect of our healthcare system, or not giving them adequate training doesn't help the healthcare system. It doesn't help the patients. We do believe at FindARotation that all students need more options. They need more opportunities. When they have the ability to experience a wider variety of clinical experiences, of rotations and clerkships, they have a better ability to choose something that's going to be beneficial for them. It's going to decrease their burnouts, decrease recidivism, decrease the changing of specialties that we discussed earlier, which ultimately is going to lead to a stronger healthcare professional and a stronger healthcare system. So we've all heard what the word crowdsourcing, but we might not have a firm grasp of what it means. And in simplicity, it just means we're taking resources that are already out there and adding them in a way that they were possibly ignored before. This can be technological resources or the resource of people. We see this with housing rentals, with Airbnb and VRBO, really expanding the options that students have or that renters have to find these rental locations, and gives the host a separate ability to earn an income. We also see this with ride shares like Lyft and Uber. Even traffic reporting. So on Waze, you can report traffic accidents way before the Department of Transportation or possibly the local law enforcement would be able to report it. And that just provides a better system and a more informed general public. There are many companies that use crowdsourcing in one way or another, but this hasn't really been used in clinical education or medical education at all. What we believe crowdsourcing this type of education can do is, again, tapping into that resource, the 85% of physicians that aren't in academic medicine. And unfortunately, those in academic medicine are often forced to teach whether they want to or not. And that's not necessarily a good experience for them or the students. By tapping into all of the potential physician instructors out there, we can really select those, or they can self-select those that have an interest in it, that want to make it a great experience. And again, giving more rural experiences and more private practice experience, more rare specialty experiences to students looking for those unique experiences, trying to find that one niche that they really feel comfortable in, that they're going to enjoy a good work-life balance in. We help to break down these academic versus non-academic boundaries. And by utilizing a lot of technology, we can automate a lot of the processes that currently take a lot of work and time for physicians. So if a student was to cold call a private practice doctor, for instance, and try to set up a rotation, well, that requires a lot of time on the student's part. They have to call many places, email many places, get a lot of rejections, waste a lot of time. But also, if a physician accepts it and they don't have a system in place for this, there are many different forms of documentation that both have to fill out. There are student evals, there are potential letters of recommendation, there are the financial aspects, the transactions that have to go there. And by having all of these in one single system, one platform, it makes it simpler for everyone involved. And we believe this will ultimately just advance medical education in a way that hasn't been done previously. So some of the problems that we're trying to solve right now are finding students and sites. I know many physicians that have to go out and advertise their own location, whether that be on social media or starting their own website. Granted, many can go to their local hospital, but many don't have, or local hospital or university, many don't have that opportunity. They might be too far away or just not connected in that way. So by having this centralized marketplace, then we can limit that ability or that problem right there. Scheduling, everyone here has probably used Calendly or some sort of alternative. So by having an in-app automated scheduling, we can prevent double bookings. We can make sure that students and physicians know exactly what's going on at what time, and prevent a lot of complications that can happen if you're trying to, for instance, manually schedule your rotations with multiple students. Documentation is always a pain. Students have to fill out dozens of documents to go to certain rotation sites, but by allowing for SMS or text messaging, and for e-signatures, we can have everything in one central location. Doctors don't need to print things out, sign it, upload it, email it, fax it. Students the same way. Everything can be done within the system. The payments and compensation can also be done just like an e-commerce site or any other site that requests payments, whether it be PayPal, connecting your bank accounts, any sort of payment system like that. And the tax implications or tax documentation can automatically be sent at the end of the year, so a physician doesn't have to worry about it. Of course, there are many benefits to teaching, but sometimes if a new preceptor is contemplating teaching students, taking on new students, they might not be aware of all of the benefits. And of course, we should teach for the enjoyment of teaching and for sharing our knowledge with the next generation of future physicians. But we also learn a lot from teaching. We learn a lot from our students. We can learn from their different cultural upbringings, from our different ages, the different technological knowledge, social media. They can actually become advocates for your practice in many cases. And by increasing the supply of clinical sites, we believe with the same demand or similar demand, we reduce the cost, therefore reducing the student debt, at least in certain instances. Physicians can also win academic awards, earn tax benefits, earn CME credits, and many other benefits in that aspect, depending on what state and what medical board you're associated with. And of course, there's the financial compensation, because for those that require it, you should be rewarded for your time, for your service, and giving back to the community. Here's a list of references for some of the stats mentioned earlier, and if you would like a list of these, feel free to contact me. Really, the only ask at this point is that you think about joining the community. We're in beta testing right now. We're getting a lot of positive feedback from our several dozen physicians and students that have been using it, and we would like to connect with more physicians, more entrepreneurs, more hospitals, academic administration to we're still early enough in this process that we can make a lot of changes to make it more beneficial for each individual's needs. So feel free to join our community at FindARotation.com, and you can reach me and all of my social media links at this link below, ChaseDiMarco.com/media, and I can take questions.